Back then, I was just a young man trying to find my way. He was already a legend. People traveled across the country to buy his work. Some waited years for one piece. He was quiet, but when he spoke, the room settled. I remember asking him why he would give something so valuable to someone like me. He said a man can sense the heart inside another man. He said the tools would choose when to change my life. That night in the shed, I held the chisel up to the lantern light. Even after all these years, the blade gleamed like it had been forged yesterday. I ran my finger slowly along the carved markings on the handle. Most people would think it was just decoration. But I remembered the craftsman telling me that the markings were more than symbols. They were signatures, proof, identity. I looked at the tools and thought about my son. His frustrated eyes, his clipped tone. How he looked at me like everything I did belonged in a different century. He was not cruel by nature, but life had made him impatient. Chasing money, chasing status, chasing a version of success that never made room for an old man with worn hands and a box of memories. I kept thinking of what he said, that the tools meant nothing, that I had wasted my life on small jobs and small dreams. But the truth was simple. I never wanted riches. I wanted purpose. I wanted to create things that would outlive me, even if no one knew my name, even if no one understood. But there is something about being mocked by your own child that shakes you in a way nothing else can. It is like the universe taps your shoulder and says, maybe it is time. Maybe silence is no longer kindness. Maybe the lesson has to be loud. So the next morning, I made a call. I had an old acquaintance at the local museum, a historian who specialized in handmade artifacts. He had visited my shed once years ago and told me that my tools fascinated him. He asked if he could study them one day. Back then, I told him no. The craftsman trusted me, and I was not ready to break that. But now the moment felt right. When the historian heard my voice, he sounded surprised. I told him I needed an appraisal, not for selling, not for glory, for clarity, for truth. He said he would come that afternoon. I hung up and felt something settle inside me, something steady. My hands did not shake. My breath did not tremble. I just felt ready. Later that day, I told my son and the rest of the family that a museum expert was coming to look at my tools. My son laughed again. He said I was wasting the man's time. He said no one wanted to see my old scraps of metal. I only nodded and told him that if he believed that, he should stay and watch. And for the first time in a long while, he actually listened. When the clock reached 3, a car pulled up the driveway. The historian stepped out, carrying a clipboard and wearing gloves. My son smirked. My daughter looked confused. Everyone else waited like they were about to witness another one of my harmless old man hobbies. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. The tools had waited 50 years for this moment, and I had waited my whole life for the day my son saw me clearly again. The historian stepped into my shed like a man walking into a chapel. He paused right at the doorway, eyes drifting across the shelves, the scattered pieces of wood, the lantern glow, the smell of oil and time. My son stood behind him with his arms crossed tight across his chest, still wearing that half smile that said he expected nothing. Everyone else huddled near the door, whispering like they were waiting for the punchline of a joke. I lifted the old toolbox onto the workbench. The historian moved closer, slow and careful, as if each step carried weight. He looked at the box, then at me, then back at the box again. His jaw tightened. His breath changed. He asked if he could open it. I nodded. When he lifted the lid, the room shifted. Not physically, just the atmosphere. Like the air grew heavier, like some old spirit had woken up and was watching all of us quietly. The historian stared inside without touching anything. He leaned in, studying the arrangement of the tools, his brow furrowing the way it does when a man realizes he might be standing in front of something impossible. My son lost his smirk, just a little. His arms loosened. He leaned forward to see what the man was staring at. The historian finally reached for a pair of gloves and slipped them on. He lifted the chisel first. He held it like a newborn child, turning it slowly. He whispered something under his breath, something none of us could hear. His fingers traced the markings carved into the walnut handle. Then he pressed his thumb carefully against the metal edge and inhaled sharply. I had seen that reaction once before, many years ago, when the craftsman himself showed me how the blade caught the light. The historian set the chisel down carefully on a cloth he had brought. Then he picked up the hand plane. His hands trembled. My son noticed. His posture changed completely. He uncrossed his arms. He took one small step forward. The historian opened his clipboard and flipped through several laminated sheets until he found the page he needed. He placed the plane beside the chisel, then compared the pattern on the brass knob to a photograph. His lips parted. He asked me where I got the tools. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man trying not to spook a wild animal. I told him the truth, that the craftsman gave them to me when I was a young man working under him, that he told me they were the last set he ever made, that he trusted me to keep them safe. The historian closed his eyes for a moment. A quiet sound escaped his throat, something between disbelief and awe. He stepped back, looked at the tools, then at me, then at the tools again. He said my name softly. Then he said these tools were not just rare, they were not just valuable, they were legendary. My son blinked. The family went silent. Even the crickets outside stopped. The historian said these pieces were from the missing masterwork collection of the craftsman known worldwide for creating some of the most iconic handmade tools ever recorded. A man whose work was believed to be lost because he never sold his final pieces. The tools were his signature, his legacy, and no one had seen them in nearly half a century. Then the historian leaned closer, lowering his voice even more, and said he needed to test something. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small light, the kind used for examining antiques. He shined it across the burned pattern on the hammer handle. His eyes widened. He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. He asked my family if anyone had touched the tools besides me. I told him no. He nodded hard, like the answer mattered more than I understood. Then the historian did something that turned the entire room upside down. He stepped back, took out his phone, and called someone from the museum. His voice was tight, urgent. He told them to send a secure transport team immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. My son whispered, "What is happening?" The historian ignored him. He hung up and looked at all of us. His hands were still shaking. He said the tools were worth millions, but that the exact number depended on expert confirmation, historical verification, and global auction interest. Then he looked right at my son and told him these were not old tools. They were national treasures. My son swallowed hard. His face lost all color. The room shifted again, but this time it was not the air that changed. It was him. He looked at me with eyes I had not seen since he was a boy. Eyes full of confusion. Eyes full of questions. Eyes that suddenly realized maybe his father had lived a life he never truly understood. While we waited for the museum team, the historian kept examining each piece. He moved slower with every tool, like each discovery added another layer to his shock. My son kept pacing behind him, running his hand through his hair, staring at the floor, then staring at me. When the last tool was laid on the cloth, the historian stepped back and exhaled like he had been holding the breath his entire life. He looked at the family and said he needed to be very clear. He said this was not just a valuable collection. This was the single most complete and untouched masterwork set known to exist. He said the craftsman had only ever made one, and it was believed to be lost forever. And then he said the number. Not the full value, just the estimate, enough to make everyone's knees buckle. He said 18.7 million. My son dropped into the nearest chair. He put his hands over his face. His breathing changed. His pride cracked open like a rotten beam. And in that moment, even though no one spoke, everyone understood the truth. The rusty old tools he mocked were worth more than every asset he owned. And the man he thought was small had been carrying a giant's legacy in a metal box all along. The museum transport team arrived faster than I expected. 2 vans pulled into the driveway, plain on the outside but built like fortresses on the inside. 4 people stepped out, all wearing gloves and carrying cases designed to protect objects far more delicate than anything I had ever worked with. My neighbors peeked through their curtains. My son stood frozen near the shed doorway, looking like a man who had just watched the ground beneath him shift an inch to the left. No one said a word as the team walked past him. The historian gave them a quick briefing, his voice still trembling with shock. He pointed to each tool on the cloth one by one, explaining how rare they were, how untouched, how impossible it was that a full set had survived this long. The team members kept glancing at me with expressions I could not quite read. Respect, maybe. Curiosity. A bit of disbelief. My son watched all of it with his jaw clenched tight, the humiliation still fresh on his face. One of the transport team members asked me to step forward. She said she needed to confirm something. She picked up the chisel and turned it so the lantern light caught the metal. Then she asked if I had ever sharpened it. I told her I had, but only by hand, and only rarely. She nodded slowly, studying the angle of the blade. She said whoever taught me had taught me well. My son's breath caught in his throat. He had never once asked me who taught me. He had never cared. The historian motioned for the team to start packing the tools into the protective cases. Every movement was slow, almost reverent. They wrapped each handle with soft cloth, stabilized each metal edge, and locked each piece into its own padded slot. The sound of the latches closing echoed through the shed like distant thunder. My son took one small step forward, then stopped himself, like he felt guilty for even being that close. When the last tool was secured, the historian turned to my family and said he needed to ask me a few questions privately. I told him whatever he had to say could be said in front of everyone. My son lifted his head a little, as if hoping the historian would refuse, but the man agreed. He asked if the craftsman had told me anything specific about the set. I nodded. I told him the craftsman had said the tools would choose when to change my life. The historian's eyes widened slightly. My son let out a long, shaky exhale. The historian said the craftsman was known for speaking in riddles like that, but every time he did, those words turned out to matter. He said the man never chose people randomly. He said the craftsman saw ability in people before they saw it in themselves. My son looked down at the floor, his hands fidgeting. It was the first time I had seen him look small in a long while. The historian explained that once the tools arrived at the museum, they would be examined by specialists. They would run tests on the metal, study the markings, compare them to archived photographs, and verify authenticity. If everything aligned, the set would be declared the most valuable handcrafted tool collection ever found. 18.7 million was the conservative estimate. Auctions could drive the value even higher. My family gasped. My son's mouth opened as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. After the team carried the cases to the vans, the historian stayed behind to fill out some paperwork. My son finally stepped toward me. He hesitated before speaking, which already told me more than any words could. He said he did not understand how I had something like that all these years. I told him it was never about money. It was about trust. The craftsman trusted me to protect something precious, and I had done just that. My son swallowed hard. He said he wished I had told him. I looked him right in the eyes and asked why, so he could roll his eyes at that too, so he could tell me I was wasting my life, so he could call the tools scraps. He looked away, ashamed. He said he was wrong. His voice cracked on the last word. The historian approached with the final forms. He said the museum needed my signature as the legal owner. I took the pen and signed slowly, feeling the weight of every letter. My son watched my hand the same way he did when he was a child trying to learn how to carve straight lines. He had once admired me. Somewhere along the way, admiration turned into impatience, and impatience turned into judgment. The historian thanked me for trusting them with the collection. He said the museum would insure it immediately and begin the process that could take weeks. He said I should prepare myself for a lot of attention once the news broke. I told him I preferred peace. He said peace might be hard to find for a while because discoveries like this changed history books. When the vans finally drove away, the shed felt different, lighter, quieter. The absence of the toolbox left a hollow space on the workbench. My son stood beside me, both of us staring at the empty spot. He asked if I was angry with him. I told him anger was a young man's burden. I told him all I ever wanted was a little respect. Not worship, not praise, just respect. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. He tried to say something, but the words tangled in his throat. I put a hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was a little boy who scraped his knee. He let out a shaky breath, and for a moment, he leaned into my hand, like the child he used to be. The sun was setting outside the shed, painting the dust in gold. I could feel the next part of this story coming. The appraisal, the auctions, the consequences, the choices I would have to make. My son waited quietly beside me, unsure of what came next. I took a deep breath. The tools had chosen their moment, and now it was time for me to choose mine. For the next few days, the house felt like it was holding its breath. My son kept hovering around me, unsure whether to apologize again or stay silent. He followed me from the kitchen to the porch, pretending he needed water or fresh air or something from the hallway closet, but I knew he just did not want to leave me alone. Every time my phone buzzed, he stiffened like he expected another shock to fall out of the sky. The museum called on the fourth morning. The historian's voice sounded different, steadier. He told me the team had worked through the night. They used scanners, ultraviolet lights, high-powered magnification, and chemical tests on tiny metal fibers. Every test came back perfect. The collection was authentic. Not only authentic, but historically complete. A once-in-a-generation discovery. My son stood across the room listening, eyes wide, fingers tightening around a cup he had forgotten he was holding. The historian said the museum board wanted to meet me. They wanted to discuss preservation, display rights, and long-term agreements. My son mouthed the words, display rights, like he had never heard them before. The historian asked if I could come in the next day. I told him yes. That night my son sat with me on the porch, no phone in his hand, no impatient tapping on his knee, just him and the quiet. He asked what the craftsman was like. I told him stories I had kept tucked away for decades, how the man could look at a piece of wood and see its future, how he spoke gently but worked like a force of nature, how he noticed every detail, even the ones no one else cared about. My son listened, genuinely listened, for the first time in years. He asked why the craftsman chose me. I told him I did not know for sure. Maybe he saw the way I paid attention. Maybe he saw that my hands loved working more than my mouth loved talking. Maybe he saw the boy I once was. My son looked down at his own hands then, like he was wondering what people saw when they looked at him. The next morning, we drove to the museum together. My son insisted on coming. He said he wanted to understand everything, finally. The building looked different to me now, larger, more serious. The curator greeted us at the entrance and escorted us to a private room upstairs. There were 7 people waiting at a long table. They all stood when we walked in, which startled me. My son's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. On the table were photographs of the tools, each one taken from different angles, magnified images of the carvings, reports listing metals, origins, chemical compositions, and historical references, dates going back 70, 80, even 90 years. The craftsman's signature appeared in old black and white photos, matching the patterns on my hammer handle exactly. The room felt sacred somehow. One board member spoke first. She explained that the collection was the only known complete masterwork set confirmed to exist. Another board member said the tools held artistic, cultural, and national value. They wanted to preserve them permanently. My son looked at me as if waiting for me to agree instantly, but I told them I needed to know the terms first. The board chair slid a document toward me. He said the museum wished to purchase the set outright. The room fell silent. My son leaned forward. The chair listed the offer slowly, clearly. 18.7 million, direct, no auction, immediate transfer. My son's breath left him in one long shudder. His fingers gripped the arm of his chair. The number hung in the air like a heavy lantern. The board watched me closely, but inside I felt something unexpected, calm, steady. I asked what would happen if I declined. The board chair blinked. He said an auction would likely raise the value even higher, possibly into the 20s or 30s, but museum ownership would allow controlled preservation. Auction ownership would put the tools in private hands. My son whispered the word millions under his breath like it was a prayer. I sat back and thought about the craftsman. I thought about the shed. I thought about the way those tools had waited all those years without ever asking for anything. And I thought about the moment my son looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Money had never been the purpose, but meaning had always been. I asked if the museum could preserve the tools but still list my name as the craftsman's chosen steward. The board exchanged glances. The chair nodded. He said they could dedicate an entire exhibit to the craftsman and his final apprentice. My son looked at me sharply when he heard the word apprentice, as if the idea that I had once been chosen by a master finally sank in. I told the board I would accept the offer, but I wanted one more thing. I wanted a small plaque added to the exhibit. A simple line. Something the craftsman once told me. They agreed immediately. My son kept staring at me with this strange mix of pride and guilt and awe. When we left the museum, he walked beside me slower than usual, like he did not want the moment to end. Outside, the sunlight hit his face, and for the first time in a long while, he looked younger, softer. On the ride home, he asked what I planned to do with the money. I told him I had not decided yet. He asked if I would help him with his debts. His voice cracked when he said it. I looked out the window for a long moment before answering. I told him that respect mattered more to me than repayment. That a man should learn to stand on his own feet, not lean on old ones he once mocked. He nodded hard, tears burning in his eyes. He said he wanted to change. He said he wanted to fix things between us. I told him change did not start with apologies. It started with action. He understood. That night he sat with me again on the porch. No jokes, no pride, just presence. And for the first time in many years, I felt like I had my son back. But the world had not heard the story yet. The public announcement was coming. Reporters, cameras, noise, and choices that would change everything. The tools had changed my life once. Now it was my turn to decide how the lesson would reach the world. The announcement came on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my tea the same way I had for decades, when the museum called to tell me the press release had gone out. They warned me that things might get noisy. I thanked them politely and hung up. I did not think much of it until 20 minutes later when the first reporter knocked on my door. My son answered before I could stand up. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him, and told the reporters that I was not giving any statements today. His voice was steady, protective, something I had not heard since he was a teenager defending his sister from a school bully. When he came back inside, he looked at me almost shyly, as if asking silently whether he had done the right thing. I nodded. He smiled just a little. But the reporters were only the beginning. Within hours, the story had spread online. Headlines appeared about the lost masterwork collection discovered in a small town. Articles talked about the craftsman's legacy, the mystery of his final years, and the fact that the tools had been preserved perfectly by a man no one expected. Some articles mentioned me by name. Others simply called me the unknown apprentice. People from around the world were sharing photos of the tools and tagging the museum. My son kept refreshing his phone, shaking his head every time the numbers jumped higher. By evening, the museum called again. They asked if I could come in for a small ceremony the following week. Just something private before the exhibit opened to the public. They wanted to honor the craftsman and his work. They wanted to honor me, too. My son asked if he could come along. I told him, of course. The next few days were quiet but restless. My son stayed close, offering to help with chores he never cared about before. He patched a loose board on the porch, took out the trash without being asked, even sat with me while I worked on a small wooden stool in the shed. He watched my hands move the way he used to when he was small, wide-eyed, and curious. Every once in a while he asked a question, not a question about money, a question about technique, about how to tell when wood is ready, about how to feel the grain instead of just seeing it. Those were the questions I always wished he would ask. The morning of the ceremony, we dressed simply. I wore my old brown jacket, the one my wife used to mend every winter. My son wore a shirt I had not seen him take out of the closet in years. He looked nervous but determined. When we reached the museum, the historian greeted us with a warm handshake. He looked at my son carefully, like he could see the shift in him. He led us into a private gallery. The lights were low, the air cool, and in the center of the room stood a glass display case. Inside lay the tools, arranged exactly as they had been in my toolbox. The chisel, the plane, the hammer, the saw, all of them resting on a deep velvet cloth, glowing softly under the lights. My son froze when he saw them. His breath hitched. He reached out, then stopped himself, fingertips hovering over the glass. The historian stepped aside and let us stand there quietly. I could feel the craftsman in the room somehow, as if he had only stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. I walked closer to the case. Every mark, every groove, every symbol. It all looked exactly the same, yet seeing them there made my chest tighten in a way I did not expect. A board member approached me with a small plaque. She asked if I would like to place it in the display before they sealed the case permanently. I took the plaque into my hands. The words were simple. The line I had requested. "A tool is only as true as the hands that guide it." My son read the words out loud in a whisper. His voice cracked halfway through. I placed the plaque gently inside the case and stepped back. The historian nodded to the technicians, and they sealed the case with quiet, deliberate movements. The board thanked me for preserving the tools for so long. They said the exhibit would open soon, and that thousands of people would come to learn the craftsman's story. My son stood beside me, shoulders straight, pride glowing in his eyes. When we left the museum, he walked slowly, taking in every step like he knew this moment mattered. That night, back home, we sat on the porch again. The sky was clear, the air cool, and the world felt strangely peaceful. My son broke the silence first. He said he needed to tell me something. He said he had been chasing the wrong kind of success for too long, trying to prove himself in ways that never mattered. He said he had forgotten where he came from, forgotten the man who taught him how to hold a hammer, how to fix a loose hinge, how to stand tall without bragging. He said he wanted to be better, for himself, for his kids, for me. I told him I believed him, because this time I truly did. We sat there together for a long time, just listening to the night settle around us. When he finally stood to head inside, he put a hand on my shoulder. Firm, steady, a gesture that said more than any apology ever could. As for me, kiddo, I learned something too. People forget the weight of the quiet things, the value of the things that do not shout for attention. But the truth always waits. And when it finally rises, it rises like the sun. Slow, certain, impossible to ignore. And if you are out there listening, maybe you have something quiet waiting inside your own life. Something underestimated, something mocked, something forgotten. Do not throw it away. Do not let anyone tell you it is worthless. Sometimes the thing they laugh at ends up being the thing that saves you. If you want to hear more stories like this, and you feel this one in your bones, stick around for the next tale. I will be here, telling them the way they were meant to be told.